All right, welcome back to the Essence of Tea podcast. I'm your host, Jenny J, and I have this amazing guest with me, my friend...
Alex Bates. How's it going?
Yeah, and thanks so much for watching or listening to us. And today we have a very, very fascinating topic of, you probably would have never guessed this for me, D&D and tea. So we got our tea drinks here. He's got a silky sweet matcha, and I made a super nerdy with edible glitter. I call it my, and if you're watching on video, my unicorn lemonade. So if you're watching this is butterfly pea flower. Whoop! And it's going to turn kind of like purplish.
I gotta admit, I'm genuinely a little bit jealous. I'm so curious to try that.
So I just put lemon juice in it, and it changes the pH, and it's got the little glittery, kind of like your potions. Okay, so when I play D&D, and I did used to play D&D forever ago, before I started the tea company, I was a cleric. So like healing potions and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So, but honestly, I don't know that much about D&D, other than I love it for the community aspects and the creativity. So when I was a high school teacher, that was our private school's extracurricular activity.
Oh, nice.
So, and the other teacher was like, you know, here at this school, we don't have that many kids, and they're not really athletic, so just letting you know, if you want to get to know them better, you probably should start learning how to play D&D. And I was like, what's that? Dungeons and Dragons. I'm like, I had no clue. I had honestly no clue. I knew what comic books were. I knew what movies were. I did not know what RPG meant. I did not know that it, you know, but the more that I got to know, I'm like, oh, it's like playing pretend, but it's like a board game with stories and very intricate thoughts of everyone around the table, or, you know, or in real life, I guess there's...
And the dice give you a mechanism for resolving uncertainty, which is an issue that, like, shared storytelling can run into, where it's like, no, I do this. Well, I don't know if you can do that. Well, no, I can. No, you can't. Well, then let's roll some dice and let random chance figure it out. And so that gives you, it sort of builds, it builds suspense into the story, because, well, I'm going to try to shoot that goblin with an arrow, but let's see whether I hit or not, and you don't know until you... So it's, I agree with you completely. It's a wonderful exercise in collaborative imagination and storytelling, with that added suspense of, you don't always know whether you're going to succeed at what you're trying to do or not. And that's one of my favorite things about it, is the way that, drama springs organically just from the table.
Yeah, and so here we also have some treats, because I wanted everything to be kind of like D&D nerdy, kind of potion colors and things like that, just creativity, kind of the fantasy realm. And so we got toast, and I brought you some of our Earl Grey creamed honey, which is our best seller. It's black, and most people look at it and they're like, what is that? You gotta try some. So I got you 2 pieces of toast, and then our lavender creamed honey too. So the lavender one will be purplish, and then... 2 very different tastes, but, you know, that way we can have a snack during our tea time, our D&D tea time. And then we've also got, and most people are just like, why is that black? And then they taste it. I don't know. You're going to have to tell me what you think.
I am intensely curious.
So, but it's honey. So this is Earl Grey creamed honey, and then we also have our lavender creamed honey. And What do you think?
What?
That's what everyone says.
I don't know what I was expecting, but I was not expecting that. That's so good. Yeah. It's like
and you want
floral candy.
And it tastes, I think it tastes like candy. It's honey. It's Alaskan raw honey.
But yeah, like flowery candy. Oh man, that's so good.
It's so good. And then, people are like, how did you put the flavor in there? And I'm like, well... It's honey. They're like, but did you add sugar? I'm like, no, it's honey.
It's a level 4 druid spell.
But yeah, people have, keep loading it up if you want, because you can put it in your drinks. Of course, it'll just taste like Earl Grey.
Yeah.
But you can put it on like an ice cream sundae. Like put that on your vanilla ice cream and have like a London fog sundae. We know in the world of tabletop games and D&D that there is always food. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Always some sort of food, some sort of snack. And for those of you watching who are just like, what in the world is she talking about? You know how the tea culture is for like every single person in the world, and people come together from all sorts of backgrounds. But like for me, when I was just starting to learn how to drink tea, and when I was a high school teacher, that's when I started learning how to play D&D because it was our school's extracurricular activity. But I'm not going to drink a bunch of Mountain Dew because honestly, the older you get, you cannot just be drinking cases of Mountain Dew anymore.
No.
So, you know, you drink your tea, you got your caffeine and the matcha. So, yeah. But yeah, isn't that crazy?
This is really good. I
don't know if you like the lavender. It's kind of a hit or miss depending if people like lavender. I try not to make it overly lavendery, but that way you can kind of like taste what it looks like.
Well,
but it's purple.
I'm gonna try it. And I do like lavender. I like. I have some deeply frustrating allergies, so sometimes I have to be careful about like flowers or pollen.
Well, it does have lavender in it.
But
so
lavender is one.
Okay,
lavender is one that does not bother me, and I it's frustrating because a lot of things are like there are things that I enjoy the smell of, but then like I gotta go take run and take some meds afterwards. Like, oh, this is great. Let me go wash my hands and face and.
Yeah. So, anyways, I just thought it'd be kind of fun because, like, when you're role playing and you're imagining these things, right?
Nice.
Yeah. And so, like, creativity goes hand in hand. I mean, instead of having something that was like, you know, modified. We were talking about this earlier about like recipes for a certain culture, or a hobby or something like that.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, well, we're going to talk about D&D and tea. Okay, I'm going to bring this really cool color changing tea. I'm going to bring some like different colored honeys that have all natural ingredients in them. They're not going to make you sick, and it's just toast, you know. But yeah, you were telling me earlier about this cookbook. Do you want to talk about, you know, this? Oh, yeah, you're eating. Oh, I'm
I got a mouthful of toast tonight. I need a minute.
But, you know, you were talking about earlier before we got started today about like a cookbook that you have that this professional chef made, and I'm guessing he must be a fan of like fantasy type of things, but it's not like a cookbook where it was a Game of Thrones like themed, or you know, like a Disney or Harry Potter themed cookbook. It goes the other way around.
It seems like anytime there's a popular fantasy franchise like Game of Thrones or Harry Potter, inevitably at some point someone decides to, hey, let's make a Harry Potter cookbook, or let's make this. And if the franchise in particular talks about specific foods, like Harry Potter, for example, they talk about a lot of interesting and strange foods. Like you can buy, was it the Bertie Bott's jelly beans? I think you can buy those as candy.
Yeah, you can still buy them.
And Tolkien, for example, like the Hobbits, they go on and on and on about food. So some of those franchises lend themselves to a fantasy cookbook better than others. But in my experience, most of them are just like quick, cheap cash-in type things where it's a very generic, very plain recipe, just with a slightly themed or maybe punny name slapped onto a generic recipe. And for me, food is a big part of it, because one of the joys of tabletop role-playing games, whether it's Dungeons and Dragons or any one of a million other games out there.
Yeah, because there's other ones.
Oh, there's so many.
It's not Dungeons and Dragons, it's just one, I don't call it franchise, or...
That'd be the franchise property.
It's kind of like Monopoly,
the
would
range.
be like a type of tabletop game.
Yeah,
still,
like Monopoly's a board game, but like somebody, let's play Monopoly, and they put Clue or something else on the table.
Yeah,
They're both board games, but they're not the same.
Yeah.
But for me, one of the joys of playing tabletop role-playing games as opposed to playing video games is that tabletop role-playing games, you play them with your friends and you play them in person. You're sitting around a table, and so...
and you're engaging in conversation, because that's how the story moves along, or the game moves along, through the story.
And people do, of course, play online, but it's not the same experience. And so when you're sitting around a table, food has always been a big part of role-playing games for me. And of course, the generic, and the cliche when you're in high school, it's like we've got Cheetos and Mountain Dew and pizza and, all the delicious junk food that gives us middle-aged people heartburn now. But I also feel like it's important to elevate that a little bit more. And so for my own games at my house that I run, we usually do sort of a potluck thing where we say, hey, this week, Indian food. And we'll say, I'll bring the dessert, I'll bring an entree, I'll bring that. And I'm not saying we never just, hey, let's just order pizza. Like,
Yeah.
we do that. But beverages, too. Like, I had a mango lassi for the first time in my life at a game night once, because one of the people we were playing with, she brought over all the stuff to make mango lassis. I was like,
oh my gosh,
this
they're
is great.
so good.
I had never, just never run across them before. I was like, well, this is going into my regular rotation. And so tea, I think, can be a wonderful way, especially in cold Alaskan winter, a nice hot cup of tea. And it's atmospheric, too, because you're physically sharing the space with these people. And so anything that adds to the sensory element, whether it's food or beverages or a scented candle or just simply being in the presence of other people who are enthusiastically engaged in this creative act with you, that all adds to it. So I'm excited about this tea. Like I specifically brought one with in particular. For the last couple of years, about 2 years now, I've been writing for a Patreon called Flavor Text Adventures, and I brought with a sample of it. It is a general resource for people who play role-playing games. Every month, there is a story, a little bit of fiction, which I write. There is a custom recipe created by a chef named Mike Ficara. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right.
Don't worry, most people can't pronounce my last name correctly, so I don't even try to, I just say I'm Jenny.
There is artwork, some fun illustrations, and then there's also some game content, usually relative to the recipe. Like if you eat dragon tongue and you prepare it correctly, then in the game, here's what game effects it has.
Cool.
For this one, the one I brought with, and the recipes are all meant to be real-world recipes. Like, if you don't have dragon tongue, substitute a beef roast. If you don't have lizard man tail, substitute a pork loin.
But if you do have lizard tail, definitely use it. It will taste so much better.
Absolutely. Just takes it up a notch.
Well, I know we went to the ice carvings at the World Ice Art Championships, and so we're seeing, these dragons, and I'm like, hey, I can find, a lizard tail. Over there, it might be made out of ice, but there's a lizard tail there.
And the ice carving championships are just so... It's one of the joys of living in Fairbanks, is being able to see those every year. I love those.
Yeah. And so, okay, how did you, get into this realm, this hobby, this creativity culture?
Well, my main gig is I make miniatures for the games. As I've gotten older, and I think this is a pretty common thing for, once you become an adult, your friends move away, they get busy, you get lives, you have jobs. It's not like being in high school or college where you can just hang out with your buddies all weekend. And so what had been a very important community aspect of gaming with my friends regularly, as they drifted away, I was leaning more and more towards solitary things. And so painting figurines and collecting figurines and using them is a big part of Dungeons & Dragons for a lot of people. They're certainly not necessary for the game, but I think they look cool and they're fun. And when I was a little kid, I enjoyed building models. And so it just sort of my interest in it kind of grew naturally from there. In 2006, I went to a games convention, and I met some people there that I'd previously only known online. And I had this sort of epiphany where I realized I'm an adult. Instead of wishing that, man, I sure wish somebody would make a pterodactyl man miniature. It's like, I'm an adult. I'll make it myself.
Yeah.
And I went to school for art. So with my figurines, I do the concept art. And I've done a little bit of sculpting and I paint them. But as far as the sculpting and physical manufacturing of them goes, I'm basically a project manager at that point. I'm the designer, the sculptors sculpt them, I tell them whether they need to change it or fix it. And then when it's finished, I send it off to a contract caster who has a little manufacturing facility, which I wouldn't be set up to do that in my garage here in Alaska anyways. And they do the metal casting for the metal figures and the resin casting for the resin figures. But I've never gotten tired of playing with little figurines and painting them. And so these are three of the figures that I've made. This is a pterodactyl man. This is what we would call an objective counter called the Crown of the First King. It's basically King Kong's skull with a crown on.
Oh, interesting.
And this is Atali Pharos. She is a bodyguard for the Cult of the Cyclops, which is a little game set that I put together a couple of years ago that is not done yet. But the miniatures are done, so I brought her with to show off.
Yeah, that's so cool. So, like, what do people do with the miniatures?
Well, it's
in case they don't know. Like,
sure.
They're listening to this.
There are people who simply collect the figurines just because they think they're cool. There's people who don't play D&D, don't play role-playing games. They just like to collect them the way you'd collect, I don't know, a little porcelain baby dolls or something. Like they just think they're cool.
Or teacups.
Yeah, or teacups.
Like
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's people
Shot
who
glasses.
Absolutely. There you
Shot
go.
glasses.
And then there's people who really enjoy painting them, who don't do any gaming with them, but they just enjoy the art aspect. They love building models and painting them, and they'll have like display shelves of beautiful statues they've painted.
That grass is really realistic.
That is called static grass. That is dyed like human hair thin strands of nylon that have been dyed and then are glued, and you hold it up with a little static applicator, and it adds a little nice little bit of dimensionality to the base that wouldn't be there otherwise.
Wow, so there's like a lot of science in making.
A little bit.
Well, I mean, I would have never thought about that. I'm just looking at it, I'm like, whoa.
Well, I'm kind of lazy. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll put the glue down, sprinkle the static grass on, and then hold it upside down and tap it, and the grass stands up.
Oh!
You don't need to have a static applicator.
Well, so when I played D&D, I was a cleric, and I literally just went to the comic store and bought one, and it's not colored or anything, and I was like, whatever, that's good enough for me.
And there's plenty of people who do that too. Like it's that would be the third way that people use miniatures, is in that they are genuinely useful on the tabletop for spatial referencing. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, this thing is here, and the monster's over here. Where am I standing in relation to that monster, or that doorway, or that mountaintop, or whatever it might be? And so having figurines on the table to represent specifically where things are relative to each other, that can be genuinely useful in gameplay, particularly if you're having a hard time visualizing what it looks like. Like, well, you're in this big room and there's a fireplace over here and two doors and a pillar and this other thing and there's a guy, and you get to a point where, like, okay, that's complicated. Either physically draw me a map, or let's put some figures on the table and show, okay, here's where everyone is. And so they are genuinely useful for gameplay that way. But mostly I like them because I just think they look cool. Like, it's kind of fun. Like, hey, this is my guy. She's got a sword. She's badass. She's tough.
Oh, there's grass on there too.
Yeah, a little bit.
Oh my gosh.
A little bit of moss.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow, such detail. Yeah, I'm not that creative. I'm good at drawing stick people, like really good at drawing stick people, which seems like weird to say. But I made a stick figure birthday card once. Like, it was like a comic, and my friend thought I bought it at the store.
What?
And I was like, whoa, I'm good at making stick figures.
I'm going to have to see your stick figure art at some point. When's your first Friday show?
So I'm like, well, I can't really sculpt or anything. I'm good with cutting with scissors. Not so good at drawing or coloring in the lines, but like I can follow like very straight things.
Fabulous.
So what are some things that that you've gone through? So for example, with COVID, some people, they didn't feel comfortable playing D&D in person anymore, or they were spread out and had to go back to whatever it is. So I actually have friends who play D&D on Zoom.
Yep.
And so, like, what are some things that you've adapted to or struggled with, especially, like, making your manufacturing of your miniatures and different things like that?
Well, my own personal gaming that I do, we did go back to Zoom. For the first year or so, we just played online. And it's not the same. It's like, I think a lot of us who have been on Zoom a lot the last couple of years, like, talking to your friend on Zoom is not the same as talking to your friend in person. It's just not the same experience.
Yeah, so
it's better than nothing, but nothing is a very low bar. And it's enjoyable. I had a good time playing it. But of course, because I particularly enjoy the physical stuff, I like drawing maps. I like having the figurines there. That whole element of the hobby is just sort of put on the shelf for me for a while. And on the business side of things, as far as creating things, I've been hit by the same problems everyone else has. Materials costs have gone way up. The costs for metal the metal figures, the costs for resin for the resin figures, the costs for rubber and silicone to make the molds that you cast the figures in. Shipping, mailing things to Alaska has become, wow. I mean, that's painful.
Like double to... Oh my goodness. Yeah, and that happened all around the holidays. Did you notice, like, the post office had temporary price increases?
Yeah.
Like that I just saw a laminated sheet at the post office. I'm like, what? They can just do that? But everybody else, UPS, FedEx, they don't have to tell you anything.
Yeah.
But the post office, I was like, oh my goodness.
I seriously considered getting a seasonal job at the post office because I'm like my business was real slow. And I was like, man, the things are so expensive here. Like, I'll just work at the post office a couple days a week. I didn't do it, but I thought about it, and I have not yet eliminated that possibility from my life plan.
Hey, we have an amazing post office lady who delivers our mail here. She's amazing. I'm so glad that we have her now. But,
For 10 years now, every Christmas, and oftentimes at one other time during the year, because they get a lot of it at Christmas, but I'll bring the post office here on Geist, just down the road from us. I'll bring them cookies.
Oh, how nice!
And so they remember me. Let me tell you, in my experience, when the people who are crucial to you being able to do your job and run your business, when they remember you and like you, everything gets easier. Everything in life gets easier.
Yeah, I kind of made enemies with our post office manager at our...
Oh, no!
So I'm sure she remembers me every time I come in, because... I'm like, is this your rules or not your rules? I'm not understanding. Wait, you don't favor people? But wait, you just told me you did this. Like, and then the whole line is like, oh man, don't debate with that lady. She's going to call you out on everything. So, I'm like, no, but just tell me what your policies are. I will follow them. But you're just contradicting what you just said. And so I do not make friends with the manager of the post office.
I mean, I've had problems. I've had problems that are unusual. Like, like I've had a couple packages get damaged badly. And while the castings that I sell are made of metal or resin, the original sculptures are made out of usually a type of epoxy.
Oh,
and so they are, and while they are sturdy in that they can survive a mold making process, they're not sturdy enough to you can't step on it. If a person steps on it, they're broke. If the box they're in gets crunched. I've had packages get damaged. I've had packages that were supposed to take 5 days to get to a customer take 3 months to get to a customer. And when you're trying to run a business where you're selling stuff, I'm very lucky in that I've been doing this for about 14 years now. And most of my customers at this point know me a little bit. They've met me at a convention, or they've bought from me before, or they've interacted with me on social media. So when I tell them, I don't know, man, it's in the mail, here's a tracking number, like, you want a refund? I've been very lucky in that most people have been very patient and understanding, because it's the world. They know they're running into the same problems with, all the mail they're receiving.
Even Amazon. Like, sometimes it's the next day, and sometimes it's like a month and a half. That's kind of weird. But all right,
and that's when you get your money back. That's when you file the I'll take that back. Like, give me that free shipping or whatever.
Yeah. But I mean, and it happens. So. But yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think with how the world is right now, it might just get worse before it gets better. And a lot of kindness, patience, understanding, that relationship that you build with your customers, that you're a real person, makes a huge difference, because you're not a robot and some, thing that just punches out and makes something. I mean...
Well, I think sometimes people misunderstand, and I had the same misapprehension myself. I mentioned I went to a games convention in 2006 called Gen Con. It's Indianapolis' biggest games convention in North America, or at least it was at the time. And because I had only ever been a fan, I had this idea in my head that all the people who made this stuff, they had offices and factories and storefronts. And I get down there and it's like, oh no, this is just like my buddy from the internet working in his basement and his wife helps. I'm like, like this is, it went from being this sort of nebulous, big business factory industrial thing in my imagination to being a very attainable, like, oh, this is just someone working from home. And that sort of made it real and attainable in a way that I felt like, if I buckle down and work on this, I can make it happen. And for the first, let's say 7-8 years that I worked on it, that I ran my company, Forge of Ice, I really treated it like a part-time job at best. It was more than a hobby, but only barely more than a hobby. I was producing 1 or 2 miniatures a year, and I made some dumb mistakes, which if I had done a little more research, I wouldn't have had. But that
happens for like all startups.
Exactly.
I mean, I've been in business for 15 years, and I can tell you for at least the first 10 years is all a bunch of mistakes.
Oh,
but you don't know.
It cost you money,
time, quality issues.
Oh yeah, I had things derail me for months. Like you have, just one, because so much of what I do is out of my hands. The sculptor, the production, the shipping. Like once it's in the post office and nothing I can do about it. I had things derail me for months. About 10 years ago, my mom got sick, and I basically shut the business down for a year because I was dealing with that. And so I think that goes back to what you were saying about the relationships you build with your customers. That's the most important thing, because then they see you as a person. Like when I saw my friends in Indianapolis as just, these are just people working out of a house. It's not some faceless business or corporation.
Yeah.
It's when they see you as a person, they relate to you as a person, and then all of a sudden the interactions become much more human and less like they're not talking to a robotic phone tree. They're talking to a person. And so that's been in some ways a good thing to come out of the difficulties of the last couple of years, in that I feel like those human connections with the people who matter, the people who care, the people who are passionate about it, I feel like those connections are stronger now than they would have been before this, because and that's a benefit of the internet. It allows you to connect with people that you would never have connected with otherwise.
Yeah, and the trend is like so many people still working from home, or small businesses like us who literally have me, the husband, 2 very part-time helpers, and 1 high school student who's practically full-time. But I mean, he's an adult. He's,
sure.
Over 18. He's legally able to work full-time because he legally is an adult. So, and when people say, well, why is this late? Or, when are you going to have this in? I'm like, oh, well, we literally make everything by hand. And we ran out of labels, so we're printing them and cutting them out by hand and putting the tape on them. And, or even, we make our own pyramid tea bags. And they're
really?
like, what? Yeah,
you didn't.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
We have the only machine in the state, but you have to have a mechanical person, like my husband, to figure out all the weird quirks, because I'm not, I can't figure out electrical stuff. I don't, I can make recipes. I can have conversations with people, and I can, manage a team, but I don't know, or maybe I just don't have the patience or background to be like, okay, this thing isn't working, push this button. Oh, it kind of cuts the thing this way. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know why the hopper's not working. So when he's not able to help and he's doing something else, we just, it gets pushed back. And with the supply chain issues and waiting for jars, which we finally just got our new custom jars for the creamed honey. I mean, that's
really good. It's so good. Should take this.
Oh, people are waiting for that. It's not even online right now. It's not available. It's sold out. But I mean, we create the blends. We hand blend them. We have to pour them into literally. So the person in their basement making this stuff with some basic machinery and stuff. That's like us, our tiny team.
The most recent thing I ran into was I ordered a bunch of shipping boxes to ship these figures in, because you need a small box. I don't want to be paying, I don't want to be charging my customers, $12, $14 to mail it, because you got to pay for the box, and I'm going to pass that charge along. And so I ordered boxes from a company that I've ordered boxes from before, nice little shipping boxes, and they're sturdy enough; they're not likely to get crushed.
They won't get crushed, yeah.
And whereas 8 months ago they shipped to Alaska, just 6 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, they said, nope, we don't ship to Alaska anymore. And I haven't found, and I don't know what to do. They want more to ship the boxes to Alaska than the value of the boxes themselves. So what I've worked out is I'm having them shipped to a friend of mine. Excuse me. I'm having the boxes shipped to a friend of mine in Seattle, and my friend in Seattle is then forwarding them to me here in Alaska.
At least you have a friend in Seattle. That's the closest point to Alaska.
Yep. So. And so it's coming up with these creative workarounds. But of course, then the frustration is you have all this downtime. I thought I'd have boxes. Nope, now I don't. So you end up shipping in, the flat rate USPS boxes, which ends up being more expensive for customers.
So light too.
Yeah, if somebody buys a $7 figurine, they don't want to spend $9.50 to ship it on top of that. They'll spend $3 or $4 or $5 maybe. They don't want to spend more than the value of the item. So it's I'm running into the same problems as every other small business owner in America is running into.
Yeah.
And it's and being in Alaska adds just a little extra complication to that because shipping's so the distance, the time. Some places just won't ship up here complete at all, which is, in some ways, it feels like being back in the 1990s. It really does. Like when shipping times coming to Alaska, like it's like, oh, this is about how long it took to mail things up here in 1995.
Yeah,
you know.
And when within the state, it's fine. But yeah, and the whole chain of people in the world. So. Yeah. So, how can people find out more about you? I mean, you've been a long-term customer of mine.
Sure.
Ever since we were even in the basement. You know, so I remember you coming in all the time, and your mom too.
Yeah.
But like, how can people find more about like what you do, where to get your miniatures, or how they can support you and your passion? Oh, and your projects, because I don't think you talked about your different projects that you've pivoted to because you're waiting for certain things.
If you're looking to interact with me, social media, you can find my company is Forge of Ice, Forge, Forge of Ice. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You'll probably get the fastest response from me on Facebook or Twitter, but I check all of them every day. If you want to buy my stuff, I have a website, forgeofice.com, and I have an online store there you can order through. Regarding my other projects, well, in a couple weeks, I'm going to a convention called GaryCon, because now that I'm vaccinated and boosted, and the convention is requiring some safety procedures, I'm comfortable going to a convention again. And I'll be running some games there, including the first time I've ever run a game for my own bespoke custom setting that I've created, because... You know, earlier I mentioned The Hobbit and Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, and they're all fantasy, but they're all unique settings. Like, Harry Potter would find Middle-earth very strange.
Oh, yeah.
And, I can imagine. And if the Hobbits started walking around in Westeros in the Game of Thrones, they'd be like, uh-oh, what the heck's going on here? Yeah. So they're very different settings, and I've created my own setting, which is a Lost World setting called Azor. And when I say Lost World, I mean Lost World in the sense of the old pulp adventures. Marvel Comics people would know. Marvel Comics people would know the Savage Land. You know, King Kong.
Well, I was thinking all the black and white movies.
Oh, absolutely.
Like the B movies, kind of?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Heck right. Yeah. And King Kong is probably the ultimate movie example. But like I said, in the comics, DC has Dinosaur Island, Marvel has the Savage Land, and it's a trope you see repeated in fantasy a lot, where there's a hidden valley or an island or an underground cavern, and in there are dinosaurs and cavemen and like the ruins of a once great civilization. And so
makes sense with your dinosaur.
Absolutely, and I'm heavily inspired by that type of stuff, like Tarzan, the old novels. Like they're 100 years old at this point. I had one of my customers describe it as it's a Bronze Age Mediterranean smorgasbord with dinosaurs. And I think that's perfectly accurate, because the human civilizations are very much inspired by Bronze Age, before the Bronze Age collapse. Mycenaean Achaea, Greece, Egypt, and a little bit of Crete, with a little bit of Conan the Barbarian and like some generic fantasy stuff thrown in. And so I'm running a game at GaryCon set in my setting. I ran a Kickstarter a couple of years ago for a set of miniatures set in my setting, and I got all the miniatures out. But the book is very late. I'm still struggling to finish it. That's been one of the hard things the past couple of years.
So you're writing some books?
I'm writing some books. I'm writing for this Patreon called Flavor Text, which is the recipes. I write the fiction for them. I've got a comic book that I write with a local Fairbanks artist named Brianna Reagan. It's the comic's called The Clockwork Queen of Oz.
I bought one.
It's about a little girl.
I bought the first volume.
Oh, I would have brought the second one for you if I'd known. It's about a little girl who gets shipwrecked and washes ashore in a strange and steampunk version of Oz.
Because I'm into steampunk. Or I used to be. I used to have more time.
I remember you used to have those steampunk meetings at your basement store.
Because you got like tea and, Victorian, Victorian or industrial Victorian.
Goes very well.
Yep.
Yeah. And the comic book's also been put on hold because Brianna, the artist, her day job is she works at the hospital. So she's been very busy for the last couple of years. But we're hoping to have the third issue of the comic out later this year. And you can find The Clockwork Queen of Oz on Instagram and Facebook. Gosh, I think that's about. I mean, like I have so many other things. Like I've had a couple of comic books in the works, some other scripts. I'm working on a novel. I don't know when that'll be done. but this
the
year,
thing is, like, the theme is, though, creativity with community of
Absolutely.
people, of like-minded people. You know, usually food's involved. We're having tea, obviously, because I'm a tea podcast. And we'll end your customer, and, you know, you've been drinking our teas for years.
Oh, yeah.
So, and, you know, it's just a way to bring people together and to have some good times and to build healthy relationships, especially when times are so hard right now. And people are so separated and isolated.
well, let me ask you a question. One of my upcoming projects, I'm working with an artist in Serbia who's become a good friend of mine named Alexander Kostic. And he and I have been working on a Dungeons & Dragons adventure called The Dragon of Kalaman Mountain. And it is... The very shortest version I give you is there is a very dangerous dragon hiding in the mountains. And you are a group of adventurers who are going off into the wilderness to find this dragon and deal with it. What sort of tea would people take with them into the wilderness to drink on a brisk fall evening in like a Denali National Park kind of wilderness? And let's say Denali in October.
Denali in October.
What kind of tea would someone bring with? Because I am just about to begin playtesting that with some friends, and we're starting a whole new game up, and we'll be doing food every time there's a night. I'll be using recipes from Flavor Text to feed them, but I'll need tea to go with that. I want beverages that are non-caffeinated, that are non-alcoholic for those evenings. So what would you recommend?
So, our number one tea seller has always been the 1,000 Mile.
The 1,000 Mile.
So the 1,000 Mile, have you tried the 1,000 Mile tea? It's the official tea of the Yukon Quest dog sled race.
I usually get your matcha, and sometimes I get your peach... It's a peach breakfast, I think.
There's a sweet peach white tea.
That's the one, yes. I'm terrible with names. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. But the reason why I say that is the official tea of the Yukon Quest, and these dog mushers go 1,000 miles with drinking this tea. It helps keep them up. It has tons of caffeine in it, you know, but it's also just tea. So you get all the health benefits of tea. And it's foolproof, so when you don't have time to even think about it, because in the fall in Alaska, it's like snowing/raining. It's really wet. You want something warm, but also like rejuvenating for your health. So it's actually a blend of white tea and black tea.
Interesting.
And it's never bitter, and you can't mess up on making it. You just throw it in and go, because when you're in survival mode, or you're in the middle of the wilderness with 14 dogs, you know, and it's 40 below, and you're in a blizzard, and you can't find the path, you don't want to have to think about making tea. You just throw it in and go.
Exactly. Because I've done the full tea ceremony once. And it was delightful. But it's certainly not the kind of thing I do like every day. Like most days... I want my beverages to be as low effort as possible. Like, heat water, drop something in, stir it, and if it's more complicated than that, I probably don't want to deal with it.
Yeah,
you know?
And that's 1,000 Mile tea.
Well, that sounds perfect.
Just throw it in and go. Like, even if you don't have a steeper, I mean, I guess you could eat the tea leaves, and they'll give you more energy, like matcha, which is technically full ground tea leaves, and you're drinking all the benefits of it. So, I mean, when I think of an adventure and a long journey... and surviving, that's what I think of, is the 1,000 Mile tea.
Well, that sounds perfect.
My hood even says, fueled by 1,000 Mile.
I have been curious about what specifically that was, but yeah, all right, fueled by 1,000 Mile, makes sense.
Yeah, we have like truck drivers who drive up north the whole road, and they just like survive off of that. But for like inflammation and healing, I would definitely recommend rooibos.
Okay.
So it's a natural antihistamine. You can put like if you're soaking the tea and like you got like a paper towel or whatever, and you've got like a cut or even a mosquito bite, and just put it on your skin and it stops hurting, it stops itching. I put it on my mosquito bites in the summertime here. So yeah, it's really powerful. And like if your immune system's going down and you have like, say you have canker sores or a cold sore, which is kind of a trigger like, oh, your immune system's going down, the rooibos like instantly numbs it.
Interesting.
Yeah, not like Benadryl, not medicine tasting or anything, and it's caffeine free. And so, like, if you need to get the rest, not stay up the whole time, that's when that's really great for your immune system, but bringing down inflammation, injury, stuff like that.
Because there are definitely times I want caffeine, and there are definitely times when I don't.
Yeah.
So it's good to know which is which. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting, because I like tea very much. I enjoy it a lot, but I am not at all knowledgeable about it. So this is really good stuff for me to know. And it's the kind of things that I can throw in. I just a couple of days ago ordered off Amazon a book on edible flowers.
Oh, yeah.
And reading through like the summary of the book, it mentioned how many flowers have traditionally been used in tea, and how much of that goes to medicine, and how tea is one of those rare things that, like, pretty much anywhere you go on Earth, pretty much any people, they have some version of, you put these plants in hot water and drink it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Yes, every single culture. You know, even the indigenous Dena'ina people, like in the interior of Alaska, that's how we came up with our fireweed blend, because they would use fireweed. There's fireweeds everywhere.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a weed. It's common. It's not hard to find.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As a kid, I remember I've lived in Alaska since I was about 10 years old, but as a little kid, I lived in Minnesota. And my mom would send us out to collect dandelion greens when they were young. And so we would have, because I have 3 younger brothers, and we're all big guys. And so let me tell you, we ate our poor parents out of house and home. And so sending the boys, they each have a basket, and like the youngest one, have to fill it up with dandelion flower heads, which my mom would then turn into dandelion jam. Okay. And the greens, as long as they were the young greens, and we just eat these great big dandelion green salads. Mm-hmm. So ever since, I mean, that's about as far back as I could remember, like, harvesting local plants for food has been part of my life. I've never tried harvesting anything for tea, though. So fireweed, that sounds fascinating. What are the properties of fireweed tea that we should know about? So
for fireweed, it's also good for cuts and sores and stuff like that, too. Okay. So it's very similar. And there's, like, not really any side effects. And it kind of tastes sweet and kind of like honey. Well, we're used to fireweed honey here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I am a big fan of fireweed honey. That's good stuff.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Tea and D&D, even though it's not technically D&D, but, you know, the culture, the lifestyle.
We'll have the D&D to it right there. There we go.
And definitely check out Alex and what he's doing. I'll put all the links in the notes below. And yeah, we'd love to hear, you know, your stories, your comments, you know, what you're interested in seeing, maybe more tea recipes with this fantasy culture or not. I'm sure that would be very interesting and help those people who are interested. Or at least you got it a little bit into the culture of what people might not understand is just community and playing games and spending time with each other.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and for feeding me and hydrating me. This is delightful. My goodness. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.